Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Where Does It Come From podcast. There's been a little bit of a gap. I've been busy with other stuff. You're going to hear about some of the other stuff because I met my new friend Amneh on that, and she's here with me today to tell us about her work. Amneh, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, hi Joe. Thank you so much for having me. It's so lovely to see your beautiful face after a few weeks gap. We were just talking about how much we were missing each other, right? It was such an instant connection. So my name is Amneh Shaikh-Farooqui, and I'm based in Karachi in Pakistan. I describe myself as somebody who's very, very privileged because I get to do a lot of things that I enjoy doing, which means that my career hasn't been very linear. It's pretty squiggly. I work at the intersection of a lot of creative enterprises, but I also care about systems change and equity. And this doesn't sound very neat on paper. And in reality as well, it's actually messy, beautiful work that lets me work with incredibly talented women, with makers and storytellers. I like to think of myself as somebody who loves craft first and foremost, rather than an entrepreneur. Um, and I think I'm just really interested in what sort of information, especially when you sit with rural makers, particularly with the women, they carry these generations of knowledge in their hands, and they're often invisible within the modern economy. But once you've seen it, or once you've been exposed to it, you kind of can't unsee it. And a lot of my work is about shifting that imbalance, not just through better storytelling, but also trying to build better systems around those stories.
Amazing. So how did you get into this? Tell us a little bit about you before all of that.
Oh gosh, so I started my career working in the traditional, what in Pakistan we describe as the not-for-profit, or people call it the impact sector, the development sector. There's all this lingo around it. So I started exactly there where people do start. But I think a lot of time working with mainstream development agencies, with multilaterals and bilaterals, it kind of exposed me to something which bothered me a lot, which is that project-based short-term thinking. We've got 3 years, we're here to fix a problem in and out. And quite often it meant that things didn't graduate. A lot of projects bring people or systems or whatever change they're trying to make to a certain level, and then they almost abandon ship. Just when momentum is being built, just when people are convinced, they leave. And then there's this reliance on markets, this idea that there are other systems which will pick up and that people are ready for this change. But what often happens is that markets aren't designed necessarily to work with the underserved communities. They are not designed for them. And therefore, when you don't design for a particular people, you often leave them out of the loop, or they fall out of that very, very quickly. So any gains within these projects are often lost within a much shorter time period. So a 3 year project, the gains will be lost in a year. And that I saw that cycle repeat over and over. And it wasn't because of lack of capacity or lack of interest, which are the traditional reasons that you need to build capacity, you need to elevate people. It was because you were looking at a problem that wasn't being resolved with the people who they were meant to help at the center. And I began to think about how you could use these systems, or perhaps create alternative systems that were designed with these people in mind in the first place.
That's really interesting, actually, and that fits. It's so interesting that you say that because that fits so much in with the work that I've experienced over the last decades around trying to make heritage systems, craft systems, rural systems fit in with the market economy. So this
Yeah.
market economy has been set up globally, and then
Yes.
we're kind of saying, okay, guys, you've been doing this for thousands of years, and yet you have to fit in with this system, and if you don't fit, then you're not in it.
Yes, absolutely. And then, so you've got this, like you're describing, Joe, you've got this extraordinary craftsmanship, right? And this is this ridiculous tension to me. And yet, then when it comes to the markets, it's almost no access, or they're told that they don't fit and that they have to create in a certain way.
Yeah.
And when you're telling an artist how to make, you're basically telling them to kill the very soul of
Yeah.
why they make in the first place. So
Yeah.
you have incredibly skilled artisans, and a lot of my work is focused on women who were completely cut off from visibility, from fair pricing. So I started building Poly as almost a bridge, but also a bit of a rebellion against how things were being done. So yes, it's an e-commerce platform. We now have a hybrid model where we have a brick and mortar store. But I think more critically, I was trying to create this network that was self-sustaining. people that can support other people in this space. So it's a very collaborative model in which, we try conversations, the pricing decisions,
You
how the
froze
product.
there a bit, Amane. Can you go back to why you started up Polly and Other Stories? It just froze.
Oops,
I'll edit
apologies.
it, so don't worry. Just say when I started up Polly and Other. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll just do this. So, okay, sorry, I'll do it again. Yeah. So, in many ways, Polly and Other Stories was, in a way, born from that tension with this idea that you have this extraordinary, sort of extremely talented people, this incredible craftsmanship, this heritage skills, and yet the makers, so to speak, have almost no access to modern markets, or if they do, they only have access to the really low value supply chains. And so when we kept seeing this same thing, these incredibly skilled artisans, and many of them were women, almost 65% of the makers in Pakistan within the traditional heritage spaces are women, and they were completely cut off from fair pricing, from visibility, from any kind of recognition of this important work that they were doing. So, we tried to build Poly as a bridge to try and overcome this problem, but it's always been a bit of a rebellion against how things were done. So, yes, at the surface, we're an e commerce platform. We also have a brick and mortar store. But more critically, and I think the sort of most important ingredient is that we're a network. And we're a network of people that are not hierarchical in the traditional sense. So the model is much more collaborative than the marketplace traditionally operates in. So there isn't this idea of an urban, highly educated, English speaking designer coming from an urban center to kind of talk down to an artisan who is rural, not educated in the traditional sense, and who is a producer and is relegated to a lower level in this imaginary hierarchy. So we work against those dichotomies. So
Mm.
because the model is much more collaborative, everybody gets to weigh in on design conversations, on how items are priced, about the story that we tell about them. They're made aware of the technology we use to connect these products to market. So just trying to keep the soul of it, if you will, very, very human, because at the end of the day, this is slow and relational work. It's connected to people, to place, and I mean, at the risk of completely sounding woo-woo, to the planet. But that's kind of the whole point of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is really interesting, and I like the fact that Polly and Other Stories. It's more about enabling rather than putting a system onto the craftspeople that you have already. So you're enabling them to fit into this odd global market system we have, where the person with the money at one end is the one that's right. And we're saying to them, okay, this is the system we're in, guys. Let's see if we can get you to fit into that system, so at least you can eat and sell your work.
I mean, and I think that there is still that problem, right? Because sometimes, especially when you look at sort of this kind of economic collapse that we're going through globally,
Mm.
those hard realities are true as well. Quite often you have to make decisions that don't sit well with you, but you just in the moment of crisis, and I mean, we're in poly crisis right now, we all know it. How much can you push? Everybody needs to eat, they need to make rent. Ideally, they want access to good health and education for their children and for their families. But at the very bare minimum, you can't have it's really interesting. I was reading something Arundhati Roy was talking about in a completely different context, but she was talking about how can the hungry go on hunger strike?
Yeah.
Right? This idea of dissent, of pushing back, of imagining a different world. You need to have some basic tools in place. So I think the livelihood part of it has always been very important. So you try and make people meet the basics, and then slowly you begin to push and imagine and ask for more
Mm.
and say, you're allowed to lead this. You don't just have to
Mm.
wait for signals from this idea. And again, that idea of the hierarchy, right? That those signals are superior,
Yes,
that
exactly.
there's
Yes, the
something about,
breadcrumbs. It's the
yeah,
breadcrumbs, isn't it? We'll you make this beautiful craft, and because we know another 500 people who can make that beautiful craft, we can lower the price to you because you'll take it because you need to.
you have to, right?
Yeah,
So it's such a coercive, exploitative
yeah,
system.
yeah.
Um, but quite often, and that's the reality of it, we're all complicit, right? We operate within, I think it's such a funny way to live, Joe, and you and
It
I have
is.
discussed this,
Yeah.
because we're as much a part of these systems, we operate within them. And I
Yeah.
think people like myself and of course all of us with some degree of privilege also
Mm.
are beneficiaries of this system. And yet we're trying our level best on almost the daily to be like, wow, what if there was another way? What
Yeah.
if we could kind of, yeah.
We wear at
And on
least
a
two
good
hats,
day,
I think. Mm.
yeah, on a good day, we imagine a completely different system. And on a bad day, we work with whatever little tweak we can.
Exactly. I think it is tweaking, and I think it's fitting into there is a system. We might not like it or approve of it, but as you say, we're part of it. But also, it's we want to get the best for the people that we're supporting and try and change the system from the inside as well. I think is quite interesting. So anyway, I want to go back
Yeah.
to Polly and Other Stories. So Polly and Other
Yes.
Stories, tell us when you set that up, and also, is there a way that people that are not in Pakistan can have a look and see and even buy things from it?
Yeah, absolutely. So Polly just turned a decade old last year
Wow,
in
congratulations.
November, which is a crazy thing to say. Yeah, double digits, yay. To be honest, I didn't start with some grand vision of even necessarily creating an enterprise. Like I said, I just really loved the craft and I had relationships with the makers because of my own background in social development. And I kept thinking about how to do it better. So it initially started off with I just had my second baby. I was on maternity leave and going quite mad at home. And I thought, well, I have a laptop and I know these incredibly skilled women and they have something to sell, which and it was a kind of the very, very beginning of the e-commerce, what then became a massive revolution in Pakistan. I started off from this idea of loving the craft and really just understanding the value of it, and also recognizing that even though we talk about markets as coercive and exploitative, if we have, the truth is the average consumer is beginning to shift. So when you make them a good offer, it's not that the people are not interested. And I think there's a lot of conversation about consumer education and disinterest and how they want everything fast and furious. And I do think that, of course, in a mainstream way, that is true. And that is where the funding is and the money is. But that's also where people are being told to do. And that's the behavior that's modeled over and over. And there's social media and advertising. But if you look beyond underneath the surface, people are quite interested in accessing these products. And they're very interested in the stories of the makers, the process, and its connection to land and people and history. And I think that's the thing that I was really interested in exploiting. And I thought, oh, well, I'm on this maternity break and I'm going nuts. So why don't I use this period to do something good? To be honest, it was a very small vision. And I don't necessarily think I thought I would end up doing this as long as I have. And that is testament to the demand,
Mm.
right? I mean, we're told over and over that Pakistanis don't value their culture. I'm not saying we take any kind of deep pride in it or that it's very good investment or interest, but clearly, yeah, if I've sustained something for 10 years, it's because people love it and they want it. Um, and I think that interest is global. In terms of your question about the UK, we do ship globally. Of course, there's some, sort of customs regulations for certain countries that we have to respect and abide by, but we do ship globally. We do have a website which we're working on revamping and making better, more accessible. I recently found out that you can even shop via Chat GPT, and I'm not really
Oh,
sure
wow.
how that's sitting with me right now, but
Yeah.
uh, we got an order via Chat GPT, which took my team and I a little while to decipher. It's like, where is this coming from? How did it arrive? But anyway,
Yeah.
so the technology is definitely there to enable us to really serve any customer anywhere in the world.
Crazy, crazy. No, it's great. So, for the people, I think there'll be a lot of people listening to this that love crafts as much as we do. Can you tell us
Yes.
a little bit about the actual crafts, what's the kind of thing that people love from what you sell? Who are the artisans? What are they making? That kind of thing. That'd be great.
So our model is sort of we have our own line of products, which is based primarily in textile and leather. We're known for our bags, uh, but we also work with 125 small businesses, of which about 80% are women owned, and we work with about 1,700 independent artisans. And that means that really we kind of work across the range. So there's everything from handmade kashigari ceramics to the most uh, sort of fine wood carving to a lot of textiles, so hand weaving and embroidery and surface designs and natural dyeing, all of it. And all of these are obviously based in heritage traditions deeply tied to land to identity and to communal memory. Um, and I think for us, it's an interesting mix of products. There are those which we would classify as fairly modern in that they are very practical, things like mugs. Everybody needs a mug, or, like a placemat, which makes them more sellable, definitely more global, even if it does mean that they sometimes become a little less specific. But the skill level that these artisans have is very easily utilized in these. But for certain products, it is much more complex. There are deeper sort of histories, deeper questions of belonging, and the work produced, it will take longer periods of time and is more sort of layered or complex. So we do like everything from quilts to candles, really, I will say. A lot of homewares, a bit of clothing as well. It's a space that I've gently stepped into because Pakistan is obviously known for its textile history and culture. We're from a rich South Asian, like 7,000-year-old history when it comes to dyeing and printing and cotton. So we definitely benefit from that, and you see that in the store. So everything from crochet hats to, like I said, block printed shirt that you could buy from the store.
Oh, lovely. I think I'm going to go shopping, I think. But
I
you've
think so
also
too.
you've also got some influences from other cultures that have come into Pakistan as well, haven't you, I believe?
Yeah, so I mean, I think this particular part of South Asia, if you think about it, was a melting pot for like millennia, right? You had the Arabs come through, you had Alexander the Great army, his army came through. I mean, these borders are relatively very modern and recent, but we border Afghanistan, and I mean, thanks to the war there, we've had for almost as long as I've been alive, a little longer, I think, we've hosted millions of Afghan refugees. While that state policy around that has changed, it has meant that it has deeply impacted our culture and our ways of making. We do work with a lot of refugee artisans, and there's products that they've made that are more sort of indicative of their culture. Or, of course, there's smaller pockets of smaller communities. For example, there's things from the north of the country which are still made in a very specific way because those communities are more remote or have been less touched upon by modern ways of making. So they still make something almost in the same way as it was made like thousands of years ago. So those pieces can be very, very special in that they're made today, but they're very reminiscent of a time gone.
Mm, amazing. That sounds amazing. I know when we were together, you were telling me quite a lot about some of your
Yeah,
relationships with the Afghan
yeah,
refugees, which is it's a fascinating thought, isn't it? But anyway, people will be wondering how on earth you and I know each other and how on earth we met,
oh yes,
which we've alluded to a couple of times on the call. So we were
yes.
both very fortunate. Earlier this month, we were both in Zimbabwe, hosted by the British Council because we were both part of Creative Economy Week Zimbabwe, which took place the first week of March. And we were both running workshops there, working with a number of young designers, amazing designers, so vibrant and fantastic. And we had a lovely week. And we were just talking before the call started about how when you have that intense connection, because I think I was away from home for about, I don't know, 9 or 10 days altogether, but you connect with people busily in on a task and they're like-minded people, you do build up a very intense connection very quickly, I would say. So tell us about what your thoughts were on the Zimbabwe trip. I'd love to know.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was incredible. I mean, Zimbabwe is such a beautiful country, and I mean, you have this idea of much like I think a lot of people have that idea of pan South Asia. So there's this South Asia, and then you have specific identities within it. So I think for me, this pan Africa versus Zimbabwe was a very interesting journey, particularly when it came to such specific understanding of the textile culture and the fashion space, and when they're looking at sustainability. It was like learning on steroids. I was like, whoop, 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 whoop. It was amazing. And in terms of the connection, I really think, I mean, Jo is not going to love me telling this because she gets embarrassed, but it's true. I had followed her work for several years before we met. So when I did walk in, I horrified her by going, "Oh my God," because I was
Okay.
excited, right? And I think there's something to be said for manifesting that kind of interest, in each other. And we're all cosmic beings. We're all made of atoms. And maybe thousands of years ago, Jo, you and I were like trees next to each
Vaccine.
other in a
Oh, maybe,
forest. Who
yeah.
knows, right? And we had that root network and communicating with each other. But I think there is something about these spaces. There's a certain kind of individual that's attracted to the space and the work and the conversations that happen. And I was thinking back to friendships that happen in these settings, and there's something about proximity. So when you spend 10 days eating, drinking, working together, there's a certain kind of particular curated proximity. You're removed from your environment, so there's no other distractions. And that's not really possible in modern life when you are home and you've got work and you've got the kids and then you've got the pets and garden and
Yeah.
something's always happening. But when you're in this sort of almost like bubble environment, it's like so perfectly curated for for that intensity to thrive. So yeah, it was an incredible privilege, and I've been thinking very deeply about sort of the young people we met and that talent. And I think one of the things that really stayed with me is, I mean, it's an ancient culture, and there was so much history and so many stories that I took away. And in some ways, it felt like looking into a mirror, but from another continent. But what I loved about it is that there was this understanding that the creative economy as a whole isn't just about culture anymore, right? It's not just about heritage.
Mm.
It's almost, I feel like, about survival. It's about who gets to tell the story of and participate in the future. And if you think about it, regardless of context, the questions that we were sitting with is how do you scale without erasing identity? Or
Mm.
how do you engage with the global market,
Yeah.
but you don't become too dependent on them?
Yeah.
And I think a question that's particularly sort of really centered in the work that we do, Joe, is how do you protect indigenous knowledge systems uh, while participating in a system that by its very nature is extractive. So, when you're looking at sort of that very local context, you realize how much of the issue is completely global and the same. And then when you look at women within these systems, it's another layer of the issues women face or the issues makers face. They're kind of the same. The language changes, the product changes, the technique, the physical environment, but everything else kind of remains the same.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit like the very beginning of this conversation today. We were talking about the global economic system, and I certainly felt I was talking to these young, amazing young people about not losing their own identity, but how they need to fit into that system to
Yeah.
to make it work for them. But there was such an energy. I mean, the key thing for me, as I'm sure it won't be a surprise to you because you were there, was when I was leading a workshop on circularity.
Yeah.
I was bringing it back to how you can deal with some of the secondhand waste that is being basically dumped on Zimbabwe from the
Oh
global
gosh.
north. Yeah. And we had such an amazing conversation. And I couldn't really contribute to that conversation. All I could do was facilitate it because they have the feelings about how their creativity is being impacted by this stuff being dumped on them, which is not normally all that great. Yes, there's a few good quality items, but mostly it's not going to be good quality. And
Mm,
that's impacting on their creativity. All I could do is facilitate that discussion and I guess encourage them to look at it in different ways of how they can use that, but also how they can push back against that. But that was one of the key points for me was that energy that they have around their own creativity and what they want to do with it. There was also an excellent speaker later in the week who was talking to them, nothing new for you and I don't think, but I think it was really new, saying to them, if you
yeah,
believe in Zimbabwe, then you support Zimbabwe because every dollar you spend on companies like Shein and Temu and those other ones, you're sending that out of Zimbabwe. And I thought that was a really clear message that we could all take to heart, I think.
yeah, yeah. This idea of voting with your wallet, right?
Mm,
100%. I think we use a lot of that in our sort of promotions as well, where we're talking about almost building pride in made in Pakistan. Because traditionally in Pakistan, if you wanted to sell somebody something, you would say it's imported, and that by being imported, that would increase the value of the product. Sort of in the mainstream bazaars, you'll hear people say this is from abroad, and that was a good thing. And that's beginning to shift, which is amazing because you're seeing local industry grow, there's employment, and there's also pride in your sense of place and who you are and where you come from. And I think you contribute best to the global economy from that position of knowing who you are in the first place.
yeah,
Um, and I think one of the things that you were talking about with the young people in Zimbabwe, one of the things that's really stayed with me is that in that very difficult environment, with whatever's happened with the cotton, with what's happened with their textile history being so fragmented and almost non-existent in many ways, which was interesting to discover, and their lack of access to raw materials and then being flooded with ready-made branded product from the high street everywhere around the world, their passion and their determination and their creativity in that environment was mind-blowing to me. Because
Yeah.
quite often it would be easy to give up and be like, well, everybody has what they need. I don't, why would I bother? And it was amazing to not hear that. I
Yeah.
was really inspired by that, to be
I
honest.
agree with that entirely. Absolutely. It was amazing that, and I took that a lot away from that. I kind of went into the sessions with one view and came out with a completely different one, which is again part of that learning, which was good. I want to talk about another session that we had when we were there because
Yeah.
one evening we had the session about inspiring women. I can't remember what the official title was, but I always call it the Inspiring Women session. When you were one of five inspiring women on a stage with the rest of us in the audience whooping. And it was just I can't recreate the atmosphere, but if you imagine listeners, these five women were on the stage, different backgrounds. There was an actress who's an up and coming actress doing amazingly well, Tendai. There was a lawyer. There was a doctor who's also become a real estate agent. There was Farai from the British Council. There was that five. Anyway,
Yeah, that was it.
that was
Yeah.
it. And you were on the stage and you were just discussing things that have happened to you in your careers, things that have inspired you. And I think everybody in the room, and we were all ages and all backgrounds, we were inspired. We were feeling like we were with you. There were stories that completely resonated, experiences. And, there was whooping, wasn't there? There was definitely whooping. It was a whole sisterhood thing going
Yeah.
on, which was it was a fantastic evening. But that speaks to a lot of work you've done on women empowerment. Can you tell us a bit about your work with the conferences in Pakistan, please?
Sure, yeah, of course. It was such an electric evening, to be honest, right? And I think for me, being pretty much the only person who was not a local celebrity was very, because all the other women, they were incredible achievers, but obviously everybody knew them. Their fan clubs were there in the audience, and there was me who had come from a completely different context. And I think one of the things that I left with was the warmth with which they created space in that circle. That when I walked up to the stage, I was like, what am I even doing here? And that still stands. They were just amazing women who had achieved above and beyond, like broken the glass ceiling in their sectors in so many ways.
You all
Um,
were. You were all like that.
yeah, but I think one of the things when you talked about sisterhood, not just the warmth and the energy from the audience, from the room, but just on the stage, it was instant. It was something that they allowed me to receive, not just as a gift, not just something I should be grateful for. And I think I've struggled how to say this, which is why I still don't have a LinkedIn post, but almost as my birthright, that you're here and you deserve this. And I think that is so rare. It's a huge credit to them to be able to make that space, say something about those women, says something about that environment. Um, in terms of my work, I mean, as I said, it's a bit squiggly. So one of the things that I do when I'm not doing poly is I chair and curate the Women of the World Festival in Pakistan. It's a festival that started in the UK on the 100th anniversary of International Women's Day. It's now, I think, 15 or 16 years old in the UK. We just celebrated a decade of being in Pakistan. So it's a feminist festival. It's a movement of festivals that happens all over the world. And in Pakistan, we've been lucky enough to have the support to be able to do it annually. And this idea, I think, about women's empowerment, I think it sometimes loses its grit because that word has been overused so much that it's kind of lost its meaning. But for me, it's about visibility and it's about voice. So through all my work, whether it's through Poly or WOW, the Women of the World Festival, I think just these ideas of building networks and creating spaces where people can come together, where they can be platforms. Often women don't need much more than that. They will step into leadership, and they don't just change their own lives. When you give a woman this access, they will shift entire communities, families, markets. They will create entire ecosystems. And I think I've seen that over and over in the legal space, in the startup space, in performing arts, where the women are so powerful in how they lead and how they carry others that you're left humbled every year thinking, wow, I mean, I think that is the greatest thing that I take away from it, which is I'm so grateful that I get to be at the center of this and I get to learn so much from all these amazing people every year. Yeah.
But no, well, your work is amazing, gobsmacking. I keep saying the word amazing. I think it's interesting, and I'm going to show my own ignorance here, which I own. Before I knew you, I hadn't had a huge experience of talking with Pakistani people. I knew some at university. I met the wonderful, as it Zain Ahmed, online just
Yeah,
before I
of
met
course.
you, which was really
Yes.
nice because she introduced herself to me. But I think you opened one of your speeches in Zimbabwe with, "Hey everyone, tell us what you think of what's your thoughts on Pakistan?" And I was thinking about that as with other people in the room, and I think the answer was cricket or um, a TikTok influencer lady, or things depending on your age group.
Oh,
Cricket.
Naija.
Yeah, but then there's also for me, I suppose in the UK, a lot of the news about Pakistan tends to be about oppression of women, amongst other things. And it's really interesting to hear what it's really like on the ground from you. But what are the barriers that women do face in the world that you're navigating and the conferences that you're running? Is it what we're hearing, or is it completely different?
So I think any narrative which is oversimplified and presented as linear is usually just a lie. And I think that's just a great way to approach it. And I think the problem with Pakistan, and it's not unusual for countries, I know I said this there as well, but this idea of the global South, I call us melanin blessed, as you know. There's one story, and I think for us, for many, many years, and for a number of perhaps valid reasons, it's been a story of violence and oppression. And so you think of bombs going off, you think of very violent men, and I'm not saying that bombs have not gone off or that there aren't any issues. Of course, there are. I mean, given where we are right now, it's a particularly fraught time to be talking about it. Um, but that doesn't mean that women are sitting in the shadows and just being beaten on the daily, which is what this narrative seems to be, or that we're waiting for somebody to come rescue us. There's amazing women doing incredible things all the time. There are women leading, there are women doing fun things. I think that's the other idea that quite often gets left out, this idea that there's no joy, that there's no love, that there's no creativity, that there's no beauty, and all of that is a complete and utter lie. I think, unfortunately, you have to be able to hold those multiple realities at the same time, and most people are uncomfortable with that. They like a simple story. They like something which can make a soundbite. So yes, while Pakistan did rank lowest on the Global Economic Forum's ranking of uh, on the Gender Equality Index this year, and it's not a place, I don't say this from a position of pride. So what that is just as true as there are incredible women in leadership and women doing amazing things that are changing the lives of thousands on every single day, and that it is a beautiful, warm country where, as one of our speakers talked about, Onaja, who turned up because of somebody she met online and was received with such warmth, even though she overstayed her visa and her welcome quite quickly from the guy's side. I don't think he expected that she would show up. So we're quite a mixed culture. We're an ancient culture. I think people forget there's something about an ancient people that we have more than one version, and one version looks like me. There might be another version that looks a little bit different, and I think we're also a very eclectic culture. We don't all look and sound the same, which I think is a little disappointing for people who don't have curiosity. But apologies, it's the truth.
That's really interesting. I think you hit the nail on the head about the soundbite thing. And my next point was going to be coming on to how technology and travel have brought the world closer in a lot of ways. The fact that we're having this Zoom call, the fact we were in
Yeah,
Zimbabwe together, the fact that everything you've just said about the differences, across your culture and your country. But there
yeah.
seems to be, because of this, I agree with you, is the lack of curiosity. But there are a lot of people who want everything simplified, and some ways of powerful people, especially politicians, who want to control that, push towards division and
Mhm.
segregation between people. They try to break the friendships, break the commonalities, and sow the seeds to make everything divided. And we're sitting here now where, with war happening all around us. Fortunately, it hasn't hit us too much in the UK in terms of actual physical fighting because we're not doing it. And you and I in particular, we were in Zimbabwe when this happened, and
Yes.
I mean I was lucky to get out of Dubai and get to Zimbabwe, and both of us had to have our flights home rerouted, so
Yeah.
that's a small inconvenience compared with what other people have had to go through, and I'm certainly not claiming any kind of hardship out of it. But I think that whole that whole not learning about a real people, not learning about the real stories behind things, and going for the simplicity and the
And the
headlines and the
headlines.
yeah, judgment. I think that's what causes the problems. That's why we,
Why we
you go.
no, 100%, I think, and I think one of the experiences, again, and I've had the privilege, it's a huge privilege, an increasing privilege, I think now, of travel. So when you come from a country like mine, when you have a passport like mine, it's not easy to get visas. The rupee is severely devalued. So if you think travel is expensive, when you spend in pounds or dollars, it's ridiculously expensive when you spend in the rupee. So I'm fully aware of my relative huge privilege. But having said that, despite the fact that the spaces I'd go to, you'd imagine are relatively educated or aware or exposed, I always 100% get the question is, so how did you learn to speak English? And I'm thinking, have you heard of colonization? It happened, and I'm just left bamboozled because I'm just thinking, how did you miss that huge chapter in history, or any of it? So I think it's incredible to me. I try and not bite people when they do that, but it is hard.
Yeah, and it is that oversimplification, isn't it? That's very much and we hear that all the time coming from the current administration in the United States, that oversimplification of everything about a culture or a person, just one little phrase to sum things up and to make a judgment
Yeah,
on people. And
yeah.
unfortunately, I love your phrase, the uncurious. That sums it up beautifully. But they don't. They just take that. Oh, that's what it's like in Pakistan. That's what it's like in the UK. We've got the recent one that apparently the UK is run by Sharia law. That's been the headline in the United States the last few weeks, which
Oh,
is
I'm sorry. Are
yeah.
you guys all right?
Well, we're coping. We're coping. It's just nuts. I think you're right. Call it out is an absolute lie, but this is what the oversimplifications happen. But there we are. So yeah, this is the issues we're facing, and our role, yours and mine and many others, is focusing on trying to promote that diversity and that
Yeah.
equality. So what's your thoughts on how we can do that? How can we be heard over this ridiculous noise?
I think exactly what you just said, Joe, is to resist that urge to follow that same format. Our work is complex, it's messy, it's layered. We can disagree, and I think we just need to stop making ourselves more palatable, more digestible. The world is so noisy and so angry, and there's so much happening. We're all polarized. Everything is so quick, and everyone is so cynical and sad. But I think the only way you can cut through that are through the stories and not those perfectly polished bite size. What is it? I think I was reading that the attention span now is 6 seconds. So
Oh,
you can't resist the urge to make that real. Just take the time to make the honest stories and to connect the dots. And, all of this, particularly when you think of it in a time of war or in the time of economic collapse and climate apocalypse. This is Joe, and you will agree, it's deeply circular work in its own way. It's highly rooted in our local ecosystems. So if you want to amplify it, I think we have to make people realize that a lot of these conversations aren't necessarily segmented. It's not like, oh, I'm not interested in the circular economy or I don't care about craft. No, actually, it's also interconnected. It's deeply connected with our lives, with our politics, in how our government spends. And we're all going to be impacted by it. It's connected to fuel, which we're all
yeah.
worried about right now, right? So I think that when you oversimplify, so you kind of box things, you're like, I care about this, but I don't care about these five things, and then you don't realize how everything is intertwined.
Yeah.
And I saw this tweet earlier this morning about how somebody was saying, oh, I don't have to worry about the cost of fuel because I work from home. And then somebody had responded, yeah, but your food doesn't teleport to
Mm.
your supermarket, right? So I think we forget how interconnected all these systems are. But this is also where I find hope because it's so interconnected. It doesn't matter where you're working. We're all working on the same problem eventually. And
Mm.
if we're all doing our little bits of it, um, then maybe there's a solution out there that we can't see yet because we're in our little silos, but we're all kind of attacking the same main thing.
Yeah, I think if you're all if you're trying to work in a particular direction and you're all working together on that particular direction, because even though there are people who, for perfectly valid reasons like stress and anxiety, they don't want all the information, or they're too
Yes.
busy, or they have really important things to worry about, like the next meal and where am I going to sleep.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
if you're still trying to do the good, do the best thing for people and the world and the planet and all of those things, then yeah, I agree. We just keep working towards it. I think, I talk about this quite a lot in terms of values. Most people know, they might be in denial, but they know when they're working against their values. And most people have values.
Yes.
There are some people, and I won't name them on here, but you know who I mean, who don't have values that I would necessarily think they
Yeah.
live in very, very deep denial, or their values are very different from yours and mine. But in
Yes.
general, people make decisions that are against their values for perfectly valid reasons, as I've said. But in general, if you can always be working towards values, positive values, then we will get there in the end. I do believe that there will be positive outcomes. Um, Somehow it might take longer than we're hoping. There may be sacrifices that have to be made on the way, but
Yeah.
yes, it is a difficult time for us all, but we'll keep going. And I think the other thing is bubbles, isn't it? Of course, I always feel this great hope from meeting people like yourself, and we were
Yeah.
very got very close with the people in Zimbabwe who are from
Yes.
Zimbabwe, and also other countries in Africa, Kenya, Rwanda,
Yeah.
Ghana. And then, of course, Rahul from India and Sevra, who came with me from the UK, from the British Council. We had a great group, didn't we, that we were with.
Yeah.
So we have that bubble where we're all wanting these positive outcomes, but we know that there are bubbles in the world who are wanting very different outcomes. And maybe our media somehow keeps us all separated in this divisive way. We somehow need to reach into these other bubbles and share our views and educate them on our views and see what we can do there. That's always the hard one, I think, the system we're
Yeah,
in.
and in these bubbles, it's almost like it's like a battery pack, right? So
Mm.
you might be feeling disillusioned, you might be feeling alone, and then you come and you meet this great community, and
Mm.
you're like, oh my gosh, they've been there all along.
Yeah,
And then you come out of it so recharged, so hopeful, so filled with new ideas. And I think also the energy or the strength to do things that you knew you needed to do, but you've just been feeling a little dissociated, a little disheartened. And now you're like, no, 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 I got to do this. This is the right time. And there are people who care about these things, and this is going to work. And I mean, even if you take the most sort of depressed view of the situation is, which is it's too late and you can't save it. Because you hear
mm,
people within the climate movement in particular kind of talk about how it's a
mm,
little late, guys, and prepare for what is it? You can't prepare for change now. You just have to kind of prepare for the apocalypse, which is
yeah,
coming. Um, Even within that, I think, we all, if we're all going to go out, just choose, I'd rather go down fighting. That's kind of
absolutely. Doing the
how
right
it
thing.
is.
Yeah, but I don't.
Yeah.
I'm also not that. I tend to be a positive person
Yeah, exactly.
for my
I
own
mean, it's not a
sanity.
don't look up quite yet.
Yeah, not quite yet. Let's hope anyway.
Not quite
That is a
yet.
great movie. I love that movie. But yeah, so it is really interesting. I realize we're coming to the end of our time, and obviously
Yes.
you and I, as we have experienced, can talk for hours and hours about these issues, and we probably will again and again. I'm really hoping we'll be together in person at some point in the future.
Yes.
See what
There's a
send it
you
out to
have a
the
trip
universe.
due.
Yeah, and the universe will sort it out for us. But can you tell the people who are listening where they can find out more about your work, about Polly and other stories, and just find out a little bit more about Pakistan crafts?
Yeah, so we're online, of course, paulinathestories.com. And there's other players who are now moving digitally as well. I think it's just a fantastic history of craft as well, and we're trying to share it. There's a couple of Instagram pages that you can look at. You can look at Purana Pakistan, which also talks about the histories of these crafts. And I think it's interesting because in some ways these are shared histories because for a part of your history, your ancestors were here as well. So it
Yeah.
does become a part of your history as well. And I think that that in itself should create a deep, deep curiosity about how things are made here and why they're made here and all of that. Um, and otherwise, I think I'm trying to be more active on LinkedIn. I am not the best at social media, but I'm trying.
Yeah,
And there's
I feel that.
incredible people from Pakistan that you can follow who are doing work. Like there's Nurjahan Bilgrami who runs Quail, and who recently did a fantastic exhibition on the Himalayan salt in Osaka. Beautiful stuff. So yeah, there's if you think I think if you Google craft in Pakistan, you might be a little bit pleasantly surprised.
Be busy for a few hours going through all of that.
Yes.
No,
Yeah.
that's amazing. Yeah, I mean, I certainly opened my eyes a lot. As you know, we've talked about this a lot. I've worked a lot with India, and obviously, when you think the border between Gujarat and Pakistan is, I've been very close to it, but not
Yeah,
across it. So one day, hopefully, be able to visit you in
absolutely.
Pakistan and find
That
out a
would be
lot more.
great.
We'll find out. You have to come to the UK as well, but hopefully, there'll be some. The universe will send us more opportunities. We hope. Anyway, it's been amazing talking to you,
Thank you,
Amneh.
Joe. Thank you so
And
much.
obviously we could do this a lot, but we better not. So I'll just say thank you so much for coming along to the Where Does It
Thanks
Come
for
From
having me,
podcast.
Joe. It's been a pleasure.
Lovely to see you.